loneliness is more dangerous for us than smoking 15 cigarettes a day, alcohol use, or obesity. Talking about Asian collectivist society in general, Korea is paying its young people, Gen Zs, to leave the house right now because of the self-isolation that's happening. Japan has a minister for loneliness. Singapore, they are paying people to procreate.
I think it's also beautiful, though, because you would never see that here in the US. And then you have some of the highest rates of loneliness.
In America, one of the stats that really scares me is like 1 in 3 people feel they don't have anyone to confide in. That's huge. And what we know is the type of connection that makes us feel less lonely is not this kind of superficial, I'm making 10,000 friends strategy, right? The type of connection that is a salve for loneliness is...
Hey loves, do me a quick favor and hit the subscribe or follow button wherever you are tuning into this. It helps grow the show more than you know. Thank you so much again and enjoy.
Oh, hi.
Hi!
We're doing this live. We're doing this in person. Wait, when's your birthday?
It just happened. I turned
Oh,
40.
that's right.
25th of April.
Taurus.
And being 40 is amazing. Did you have
yes.
this feeling too?
Oh, it's amazing.
It's...
You don't give flying, you don't give an F anymore.
So people always say, like, I was like, oh, how does it feel after getting married? And they're like, I don't feel any different. 40 does feel different. And I asked Dr. Mindy Peltz on her podcast why.
Oh, yeah.
She gave me the science behind it. She goes, oh, well, your estrogen's diminishing. And then it takes with it some other hormones like oxytocin, dopamine, some other stuff, which means your patience for rubbish that's why you don't care anymore. So there's like an actual scientific...
Wait, because your estrogen is diminishing.
And then with the estrogen, in Dr. Minnie Ware's, estrogen is a she. She takes with her oxytocin, dopamine, some of the other things that I guess make us more tolerant to bull crap in our lives.
Yeah.
So that explained a lot for me. It really kicks in 45, but I said I'm definitely pre-onset, Dr. Mindy.
Oh my gosh.
I definitely feel it.
Okay, so I've been feeling it too. So I'll share, but this past year, I feel like I've been going through kind of an upheaval because I'm 41. I mean, still 40, but +1.
Are we the same age right now?
We
Never gonna happen.
A little bit.
We have to meet at this time of year.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
So, well, I had a big 40th birthday bash we had it in where was it again? It was in Bodrum, Turkey. And this past year we had my birthday so every year we've had this kind of thing where I'll take 12 to 15 friends and it'll be a give and it'll be a beautiful weekend. But this year it was in Taormina in Sicily. And I just, I was feeling the Ice Queen energy. This like, I don't need to be Mama Bear. I am just going to do me. And my husband was there, of course. And it was, and not care about having to mama everybody else and all of their energies and all of their things, right? Because as former people pleasers, we're like, let's make sure everyone's okay.
All the trauma maladaptations come out when we travel.
Right?
Right? The dynamics when you're in a captive space.
Well, and especially when you're brave and you actually do travel with more than like 3 friends.
Yeah.
Which we travel, for those of you who follow me on social, it's
an entourage.
It's a full entourage. And now like my kids are there. So then I have either my aunt, grandma, other cousins, everyone's coming, everyone's coming with. But so this past year, I think I've turned on more of my Ice Queen attitude, and it has pissed people off.
When you change, I'm dealing with something right now, when you change how you've allowed people to speak to you for years or diminish you or be dismissive, and then you finally, I sound really cliched, stand in your power, but like acknowledge those things boundaries and those things aren't okay. It breaks the castle down. Like it has caused, with a couple of really long-term friendships, huge watershed moments.
Really?
And me really being shocked that the person didn't just immediately apologize, because for 20-something years I just never said anything. And I have a thing where and I don't know whether you experience, but I think it's an Australian thing. I diminish myself. So it's also very Singaporean as well.
Yeah, the wallflower effect, right?
Yeah, tall poppy, exactly.
Oh, the tall poppy,
poppy syndrome.
Yes.
So if you're a high achiever, you make yourself smaller to eschew being socially cancelled before cancelling was a thing, but it was just like before people like, oh, you're really up yourself or you're arrogant. But then when I moved to Asia, it exists, this whole sort of Chinese self-effacing, like, so if someone said, oh, Simone, you have a beautiful face, I'd be like, ah, no la, all bought and paid for, you know? Like you do this and so I guess it's actually kind of not other people's fault. I've been doing it for years.
Your whole life.
Only in the last year have I, like, one of my friends said to me, you know, how did you get the bravery to finally start your own business? And she got me to a point where I was super jet lagged. So Neeta, you also know how I travel, right?
Yeah, a lot.
And so I was really at one of those lowest serotonin lows of jet lag. And so I didn't have the filter to do the self-effacing. Yeah. And so I just said, well, babe, it was really scary, but I kind of knew where I test in the population. And so I thought, I know that I'm smart, so I'll work it out. And I'm smart and driven, so I work it out. And I think that was just shocking to people, that I would even acknowledge something that I've known since I was a child, but I would acknowledge it verbally. I think it's very uncomfortable when you've acted a different way for 40 years.
So many years.
Yeah, for
to
20,
really be
20 adult years.
Vulnerable. Well, and I want to also bring this up because I know we've privately had a conversation around this, where you being from Singapore, you also working and living in Dubai at some point, and also kind of in Switzerland and then even Australia, because that's, you know, your home. And then you come to the US where everyone's just like owning everything, and we don't have the shyness of, or the humility of, all right, I'm gonna just stay quiet, be small. Like, we're now in New York City and everyone's just like bold. And I was in an Uber and the guy was just sharing with me in 5 minutes his whole life story in how he got wronged by somebody else. And I'm like, oh wow, I didn't know whether to believe him or not, because I'm like, it was like an overshare all in like 5 minutes. But I'm like, oh yeah, no, we're getting we're seeing what we get, and we're just getting all of it.
Yeah. The filtering is very different. Like,
we don't filter.
Like, East Asian people are just very strategic in what they choose to tell you and why they choose to tell you it. And when I first moved back to Asia, because I was born in Asia from Australia, I was really punished in my workforce for that. I was really... because Aussies are quite warm and open too, but they will never brag. Like, okay, some will, but it isn't... They are telling a lot of information, like your Uber driver, not necessarily self-aggrandizing information, just a lot of information, which in the Chinese psyche is kind of weakness.
Right.
It's like art of war, like you're giving unwarranted amounts of information. But then if you look at the loneliness science of it, lonely people overshare. So it could be that your driver just really wanted to be seen and heard. And but tell me, what are Filipino people like? Because I got loads of Filipino friends. They're very warm, but also very humble.
Yeah, they're very humble.
Yeah, none of the...
I think we like to party. As Filipinos, we like to party, we like to entertain. Obviously,
singing
we like
dancing,
to singing, dancing,
love it.
Eating. We will put on a show for you. And we just had a bunch of my Filipino cousins in town, because it was my brother. It was his. He had a beautiful engagement ceremony this weekend, and it brought a lot of our family together. And we were just talking about how we're so open, and we are like an open book, but we're okay to make fun of each other. Yeah. Like, that was the thing. We just make fun of each other, and it's a lot of lightness. And so, but I feel like for certain Indian family members, they might not be okay with that.
Yeah.
Because they might be like the Chinese, where it's like, we don't
much more.
We don't share.
Which is why so many Chinese and Indians get married.
I know, and then they have me and you.
Yeah, exactly.
We are both mixtures.
We're both mixtures. I totally get it, and I do want to say, like, I felt so grateful when I found you, because
same.
In this field that we're in, there are so few people that look like us. Yeah. And it was so lonely, and certainly to be a similar age as well, same age, like I found it very lonely when things started going beyond Southeast Asia and when the book got picked up and then there was, speeches in North America. Like I started to feel very not seen.
Yeah.
And so I was so grateful that you were just so warm and so beautiful inside and out. And I am a critical Chinese person, so I don't say that lightly. Like, I really mean that.
So everything about
Aussie directness as well. I really mean that.
Well, and I receive that, but I also, I want to shed light on Crazy Rich Asians. Yeah, that is a whole thing.
That is, well, as in like Singapore.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting because I think a lot of my family that migrated to Australia can't even watch that movie.
Oh, really?
Like, because when people immigrate, and you know this from your parents' experience, and you've committed to this new reality, and you want to perceive that the new reality you committed to is in some way worth the sacrifice and better than the previous place. So it was just really disappointing, I think, in 2005 when I said to my mum after my dad had passed away, I'm going to move back to Asia. She didn't talk to me for about 6 months. I mean, it was just in her mind, like, what a waste.
Oh, wow.
But it was the best intuitive decision I ever made, because even after going to Dubai and Switzerland and then moving back to Singapore in 2015, that country is just everything
boomed.
They invested in 30 years ago when my parents left has now come to fruition, because everything in Singapore is planned.
Right.
Everything is strategized, and they have such high wealth reserves that and a small population, which the US doesn't have, unfortunately, so they can really control how things come to fruition. And that control for some people is not the way they like to live, but for someone like me, who I felt in the trauma of my childhood, I lacked a lot of control. I really love that safety.
Yeah.
And in some ways that predictability, especially as a single woman without a husband, living in a city on your own, safety becomes a really big factor. So so it's a thing.
Well, and so to be fair, in 2015, I almost moved to Singapore.
Oh, you should just come and live part-time, babes.
Well, it was actually not 2015 is when I sold my dental practice. 2016 is when I was going to make the move to Singapore from the Bay Area. And it was because I met my now husband, Ajit, who at some point you'll meet. It was one of the reasons why I didn't, because he was moving to San Diego and I was like, oh, okay, we're just meeting. I don't think maybe nothing will happen, but because I was going to set up shop in Singapore because of all the things that you shared. I mean, I just fell in love with Malaysia. And that's where he and I, initially reconnected. And coming to Singapore, I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone looks like me. This is great.
Yes, particularly in Singapore and Malaysia, where the population is so
they're so mixed.
Right?
Well, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is where my people are. They looked like a little bit Filipino, a little bit Indian. Like it was great. So I bring this up because now I was watching the Netflix show Dan Buettner's longevity, miniseries on the places that they're living to 100, the centenarians, and it's based off of his book, The Blue Zones. And it's spoiler alert, so sorry if you haven't watched it, but at the end they talk about the new burgeoning country that is really focused on longevity in all of the ways from the government top down. Can you tell us about that?
Yes.
Especially because your work is around loneliness. We have one of your books before it got picked up from Hay House called Secret Pandemic, The Search for Connection in a Lonely World. And of course, one of the drivers was community that Singapore has really done for their patrons. And
so after I get into that, I want to loop back into back to the connection science of everyone looking like us and how that reduces stress response. But firstly on this, so what's interesting about the Dan Buettner, I wonder if it's actually advertorial, because we do have a population that is aging in Singapore. There's a huge amount of money going towards making the quality of life better. But we also do have a population that lives to 80 plus, but right now with quite high, there are still some illness issues that have to be addressed. So what we're seeing now with Dan, what they showcase with Dan Buettner and these gentle nudges that the government representative is quoted as saying, is very similar to how I just mentioned to you that 30 years ago they invested in things. So 30 years ago, there used to be something called the Courtesy Lion campaign, which was to make Singaporeans more courteous and more polite. And now you can see that, how that's come to fruition. When I first moved to Singapore in 2005, they were investing heavily in something called, which is now IMDA, but at the time was MDA, Media Development Authority, to make Singapore a hub for filming and for the media and to increase innovation. We can now see how that's come. So this is just a third. It's one of many different agendas that are getting investment because they have the reserves to do it, to make sure that this aging population does not cause a public health crisis, right? So, yes, we want people are going to live longer because the healthcare in Singapore is unparalleled.
It's amazing.
It's absolutely amazing. But how are you going to get people to live longer but with that quality of life? And, of course, connection is one of them. We know in the Asian family system that people, unless they're in the position with similar experiences than you and I, that have had to deal with loss early on and people passing, generally you live in these kind of communal systems, multi-generational households where grandparents live with their grandchildren. And so what we know is living more connected lives lowers our stress response because it reminds us of living as early Homo sapiens in tribes, right? So this lowers our stress response and therefore people who are more socially connected have a longer life expectancy than those people who feel lonely perpetually. Loneliness is more dangerous for us than smoking 15 cigarettes a day, alcohol use habit, or obesity. And the lady who came up with that figure is actually why I'm in New York right now. So she's going to be at the Benjamin Franklin Award, and she's one of the lead researchers in the field. So it's really exciting stuff. And now I want to go back to the science of when you say walking around, how that feels to see people who look like us. We know the stats, for example, on feeling excluded within a population, how that increases mortality rates. So African-American men, the CDC have done studies that the constant feeling of being hypervigilant and on edge because you phenotypically do not belong leads to shortened life expectancy.
Oh, wow.
So you're in a constant fight or flight state. And interestingly, when I go back to Australia, I feel so conscious of my colour in a way that I have forgotten to feel conscious about it.
Oh, interesting.
And,
but there's a lot of Asians in Australia.
Yes.
If you go to Melbourne.
I'm not going to go deeper into that. I think for Gen Z, it's very different than people like me grew up there in the 90s. But I certainly feel where I grew up, which is a very waspy place, very aware of my difference. When I was the last time I worked there was when Mum first got sick, so 2014. In the workplace, I was the one of two people of colour, and I always felt very aware. And I would make self-deprecating jokes about my own Asianness, which I certainly don't anymore. But my point is there's science as to why. Like, I just never have to worry about not being Simone. Like, I just get to be Simone in Singapore. I never have to think about being the Asian girl or Simone the Asian girl or any positive or negative bias. Like, it's just, imagine you don't have to imagine, you might have experienced this, growing up for your entire childhood from age 3 through till 20, having this extra thing, this self-consciousness, this extra awareness of your difference, of not belonging, of constantly needing to fit in, and then going back to Asia and never thinking about it. So
Totally.
One of the reasons why I think things are just, ever since I moved to places like Dubai where lots of people look like me and Singapore where lots of people look like me, and those are the two markets where my career did the best, it doesn't take a scientist. Like, I just don't have that emotional load, that cognitive load. It's like an extra child I don't have to look after. It's just...
Well, and I want to speak to that because I mean, Brave Table Fam, you know that I have recently went to Dubai twice in this past year. And I was even telling you when I came back, I'm like, oh my goodness. It was just, and even for, I won't speak on behalf of my husband, but we both felt a very different energy feeling when we were in Dubai this past year. And it was, I mean, it's nothing like we've ever experienced. And I think because the hospitality was so different. so different. I mean, we live in Austin, Texas, and it's just like unparalleled to Dubai. And just the reverence that people have for their elders, no matter what. And my aunt was with me in one of the trips, and she felt so safe and so taken care of by the Uber driver that was from Afghanistan, because they can speak Hindi Urdu. And he took her to the bank. He took her to, he was the Uber driver. He didn't have to do that. But because she was elderly, he was like, okay, I'm going to make sure
this is your auntie. Like, this is...
They really take care.
Really. When my mum was still able-bodied, she came to visit me in Dubai. This is 2010. And she missed her flight. And so she had to go on an evening flight. And I was live on the radio, so I couldn't take her. But I had a regular driver who was Kashmiri. And kind of similar to my mum, like green-eyed, dark-haired. And so I just said... Chacha, uncle, can you take care of my mum? I paid him in advance, and Habib made sure she got on the flight and everything was fine. And there's just that kind of solidarity. And it's even weird for me to talk to you about this, because obviously I just got off the plane in a place where it's just not even a second thought.
That you're taking care of the elders.
That you're taking care of the elders, and the elders in some way do take care of you even though they're not related to you. And I guess I enjoy that about Singapore, as well as my family shrinks. Having the feeling that everyone is your auntie or uncle is really nice.
Totally.
Yeah.
And even just saying the word auntie or uncle,
all the time.
It changes.
All the time.
It changes the dynamic. And, whereas with just in context for my aunt, just walking around Chicago, she doesn't feel safe anymore. And because she sees, she calls the new generation. The new generation doesn't care, because she'll be going on the bus and nobody will give her a seat. Nobody will offer her seat up to her. And I mean, this is not a stark generalization, but it's definitely something to note when you go back to places like, and we've been to Singapore a handful of times, as well as Dubai, where you just feel like it feels like home. It feels like more comforting, because it's not this individualistic. It's more of a communal
society,
communal collective society. And I feel like now that we know these statistics on loneliness, and I really want you to speak to this, because Singapore is putting measures in place to actually give money to families that are also housing their elderly people, right?
Absolutely. I will just also say hilariously about this communal living thing. There's also a thing in Singapore that the elders expect it. So you will get some aggressive Chinese aunties just push in front of you in the toilet, like a public toilet. They'll just be like, I'm the elder, like I'm pushing.
Oh, they will push. I've experienced that.
So it's like a give. They're just like, how do you not know the rules? Of course, I'm pushing in front of you, and they're hilarious. So
they're so entitled.
They're so entitled, because they're like, respect me. I go in front of you.
I go first.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we know that places like Korea are paying. So we're just talking about Asian collectivist society in general. Korea is paying its young people, Gen Zs, to leave the house right now because of the self-isolation that's happening. Japan has a minister for loneliness. Singapore, they are paying people to procreate. So you get a bonus if you have a baby, because we want higher reproductive rates, we want growth rates. And then also subsidizing. The cost of living in Singapore is very, very high. And what they're trying to stop is obviously having a huge gap between cost of living and what people are earning to be able to take care of the elderly. It's extra mouths to feed. But I recently held a connection circle event, and one of the girls there said, Simone, I read your book, and what you went through with your mother, I had to go through with my aunt. Because that aunt was childless, it then fell, the cleaning up of the hoard and the taking care of in disability fell to the closest relative, which was the niece. So you can imagine, if you look at like Australian or American culture, imagine an uncle or an auntie that you're not even close with, and one day you just get a phone call and you're like, you
have to take care of them.
Yes, you have to take care of them. You barely saw them your whole life. You saw them for 3 Chinese New Years your whole life. And now you must take them to the toilet, move in with them, clean them. And yet she did it, and it broke her, and hence why she she felt solidarity with me, but she was weeping because she said, and my other siblings just let me do it. Like no one's raising their hand to jump in for, as much as it's collectivist, it's also a super capitalistic place, right? Singapore, right? So everyone's like, yeah, sis, you got this. You got this, sis. Don't call us, you know?
Wow.
And it really, really dented her mental health. I really felt for her. So that's also an issue too, is the government understands if we're not procreating, therefore we don't have children to form this collectivist society. So hence why there is like a baby bonus.
Right.
And then there's also additional funding to, you know, help you out if you take care of the elderly. So it goes both ways. It's a whole ecosystem, right? It's a web.
It's a web of, I mean, they've really thought that through.
I am sure they have full tribal council about this.
Well, I think it's fascinating,
Love islands
though.
of bureaucrats sitting around.
Well, but I think it's also beautiful, though, because you would never see that here in the U.S. And then you have some of the highest rates of loneliness. Let's just talk about that.
Yeah. So in America, one of the stats that really scares me is like 1 in 3 people feel they don't have anyone to confide in.
That's huge.
That's huge. And what we know is the type of connection that makes us feel less lonely is not this kind of superficial, I'm making 10,000 friends strategy, right? The type of connection that is a salve for loneliness is intimate connection. This is qualified as people you can call in an existential crisis, people you can ask for a loan in a financial bind, or people you could ask to rush you to the hospital in an emergency. Now, look at all the friends you have and really start to think, how many people would you put into that bundle, actually? It's probably a very small handful of people.
Totally.
And Bruce A. Austin at Rochester University of Technology and Robin Dunbar, very famous, I think he's at Oxford, evolutionary anthropologist, both talk about intimate connection numbering only about 5 people. So this is
5 people.
Yeah. So for me, it's replicated for me because I lived in 4 countries. So it's like I have 5 here, 5 here, 5 here.
So you need to have 5 people. Essentially.
You should be worried if it's 5,000 people. You should be worried if you are confusing, and we see this with Gen Z. If you're confusing people that you're having surface level transactional exchange with on social media, and you are confusing that for intimate connection,
you're like, hey, DM.
Yeah.
Hey, like my post.
Yeah, we've never picked up the phone, had a phone call, but we talk via voice note, which is mediated by 36 hours in between, so I can curate the perfect voice note reply, and that's my intimate connection. There's no immediacy, there's no answering the phone in an emergency. So this is what's scary, and I'm sorry I'm getting all like riled up about it, but that's really, besides the act of self-connection, which I would say is the very most important form of connection, the next rung are those intimates. And if you just have that massive low quality connections, which we see a lot in cities like your Dubais, your Los Angeleses, right?
Sure.
And this is why we see such loneliness with very famous people, is they are, Rebel Wilson just talked about this on Diary of the CEO, you know, when she became very successful, she felt deep loneliness because you don't know who to trust in that inner circle. You need that inner circle. I just watched the Alanis Morissette documentary on my 18-hour world's longest direct flight to New York. And she still has these 2 girlfriends from when she was in her teens growing up in Canada who've stayed right the way through. And the documentary basically posits this is also why she never went off the rails, why she made it through such extreme fame that peaked so early.
Oh, wow.
And all of the misogyny she experienced and threatening sexual interactions she experienced as an early pop star in Canada. These are the women that she kept that got her through. So
that were her inner circle.
That were her inner circle, didn't care about the fame, knew her before it and loved her before it. And these are important.
Yeah. And I feel like you see that with a lot of these early to rise folks in fame, like the athletes, where they keep the same girlfriend or the same high school sweetheart before they got founded and got shipped off to the NBA or the NFL, and they're still with them, and that's their ride or die.
Steph Curry, right?
He's one of them.
Yes.
He's one of them. Like, he still has that same high school sweetheart, and she's grown with him. It's almost like that's kind of like their anchor, their grounding. Otherwise, you'll just conflate and fly up into the sky.
You're surrounded by yes people.
You're surrounded by yes people. Yeah, that can be debilitating.
Dangerous, yeah.
Well, I want to kind of segue into something that we started talking about, and we're coming back around because you've entered your fourth decade of life. You are being more of an ice queen. You have your boundaries. And because we're going to link the episode that we did on your book, Let's Talk About Loneliness. And because it has had such critical acclaim, and I think it's so powerful. So we're going to link that in the show notes as well. But on the other side of having friendships and relationships, let's kind of dive into the thing that we don't really talk about, which is there an expiration date on friendships? What do you do if and when you have a friendship breakup?
Yeah.
Because that can spiral the loneliness piece, or the fear of being alone, or the fear of being lonely.
So I just asked Dr. Julianne, who we mentioned before, because I'm prepping to do another TEDx in September.
You are? For
and
what? Where?
Guess what the topic is? It's so in line.
Oh my God.
It's so in line.
Is this in Singapore too?
This is in Singapore, but it's for P&G, so it's a corporate one, so the recording won't go online.
Okay.
But I use these things as an excuse to work towards a deadline on a topic I'm interested about.
Because
otherwise, with my lifestyle and like your lifestyle, I'd never get it done.
No, you won't do it.
Yeah. And so I wrote to Dr. Julianne and I said, can you point me in the direction of, is it worse to be on your own or to be playing around with negative connections? Which is worse? And according to Dr. Julianne, she's like, Simone, we can't be reductivist about this. They're both really bad for you. So they're like equally bad. So the fight or flight we get from loneliness, chronic loneliness, which causes all this stress response, is just as bad as the stress response from being surrounded by people that are no longer in alignment with you. And I spent a lot of 2023 out of alignment in terms of I listened to other people's strategy about my book launch, about my career, someone that I was seeing, friendships that I was keeping. And the beautiful thing about 40 is like, whoo, don't you get in alignment? What happens? And that's exactly what I was saying to you off air. I asked Dr. Mindy Peltz, what has happened to me? It's like I went to bed 39 and I woke up with this no bullshit filter. And Dr. Mindy was like around 45. Obviously, you and I are ahead of the curve because it's like Asian overachievers. We're just going to get there faster. But she was like, at 45, your estrogen decreases. And as she decreases, she takes with her all these other hormones that make you more patient, like oxytocin, dopamine, all these feel-good things that they get diminished, which means I can imagine, just being like the armchair psychologist I am, that if you've got diminished feel-good hormones, aren't you, as a logical person, strategizing who you give those feel-good hormones to? Right. You're just not you just don't have that energy bandwidth to just be throwing that good stuff out all the time.
Right.
That's at least how I feel. So I had to make a really tough decision recently, and this is a Brave Table exclusive. I have not told anyone this. I was going to save this for drinks afterwards, but
oh my gosh! You're all here with us with our chai, spilling the chai.
Make the decision to to break things off with my sister. I actually put a pause in, and that's really difficult for someone who has a father in the grave and a mother who's not cognitive to go, the last remaining family member. I'm going to take a pause. Asian family systems are complex, but as we know, in a dysfunctional family paradigm, the person who has been doing the most growth is almost like
it's the post-traumatic growth, right?
Yeah, is a mirror to those in the system that haven't done the growth, and therefore very confrontational. So if we're in an anxious avoidant dynamic, my sister being avoidant, me being anxious, and it's always been her shouting at me and me always going back to that dynamic, and I finally say, in a very mature way, like, that's not okay that you talk to me like that.
Yeah,
it's a meltdown. Any sort of changing, and this is what happens at 40 when you're drawing those boundaries. You're changing the way you were as a cog within the wheel of the system. And this is really uncomfortable for people. And then the 40-year-old lack of estrogen thing just goes, but I don't give a shit.
I don't give a fuck.
Know? It's like, I don't give a fuck. Like, and that's really, and like, I just need to kind of high five you to that, babe.
Oh my
because
goodness.
I truly do. I had a moment, I was like, why don't I feel worse about this? Why don't I feel that terrible anxious attachment style of what if I lose that friend that I have said, I no longer will allow you to call me a small Asian. I have a name. You know, this language diminishes me. And then I get well, where is this coming from? Blah, blah. It's like, no, we're in 2024. The answer is, I'm so sorry. That's the answer for me. But then I forget, not everyone is sitting around following the culture, reading books like you and I. Right? So again,
so true.
The cog in the system changed and people are freaking out. And then the part of me that's 40 goes, but that's not my job anymore. Everyone's middle-aged. We're all middle-aged now, reproducing, marrying multiple, the second, third husband, whatever you want to do.
Exactly.
I can't carry it anymore. And I honestly feel that I am experiencing delayed adolescence. I've only really just recovered from my childhood, really healed from my childhood. Right. And now I'm having all this fun.
This is an awakening for you. I'm loving this.
But I feel like if you're a single woman with no children, all you do is do self-development courses and read self-development books. Every month is an awakening because you just exponentially have more time than everyone else to indulge in these things. And I actually made draw a line in the sand this year. It was like, no more courses for you because you actually have to integrate all this stuff that you learn. But it definitely does widen the gap between maybe some older connections. And it also acts as quite a confrontational mirror for maybe people within the family system or friendship circles that just haven't had the time to do the work. It is my girlfriends that are not in Dubai or Singapore where there is hired help, which is allowed by the government at a very affordable rate just for those who are in North America. It's not because they're bougie. It's because it's just very
standard.
affordable. It's standard. Yeah. But my besties in Australia and Switzerland, they are, once they have the second kid, they have no time. And so
they're struggling.
It's absolutely no shade to them. Their cognitive load is not on like, shall I go to Barnes & Noble and buy another book to fix myself? Right. That's not where their mind is and that's not where their time is at. And that's also okay for the connections where the love is so strong. There's a coming together, meeting people where they're at.
But I also think that for you to have these pauses, you're honoring your own boundaries. You're honoring what feels good for you right now as you've turned 40.
When I saw your Jenga video, if you haven't seen it on Neeta's reel on the Jenga video, last year with my career and book launch strategy, I gave away myself to a third-party strategy that I knew would not necessarily resonate with my audience. I know my Asian audience very well. They bought the self-published version of this book. Then they went out again and bought the Western republication of this book. They are so loyal and so amazing. And I know what they like. And I went against my intuition. I only really realized why the year was so uncomfortable for me. I thought it was the jet lag. I thought it was the flying. I was like, I'm out of my own body and I'm bloated and I don't know what to do. And then I saw your Jenga video and I was like, oh yeah, because you betrayed yourself in little small touches. You denied your intuition.
Yeah.
And so, but it's wonderful because when you go to do it again, you won't do that anymore.
You won't do that anymore. And now you're like, okay.
You'll be like, oh, hell no. Thank you so much for your input, but no.
And thank you so much for showing your true colors and see you later. And yeah, I think same with you. And I can so resonate in so many pieces of this because there have been times with my closest brother and I, obviously now I'm here because he's celebrating his love. But there have been times in our journey where, you know, we had to take pauses in our relationship. Just because we've had just tumultuous things. I was growing at a different rate. And there was just a lot of this stuff. So I can so resonate with that and the guilt of being the oldest and also like a mama bear to him in kind of a interesting way, right? And this past year though, yeah, I've had to say no and pull back on a lot of friendships and some of my best friends and kind of reprioritize relationships and actually even rethink, should I be spending time? So it was it scary? You know,
were you like, I don't give a fuck?
I think it was both. I think contextually, I was also in a different season. Like my kids are older now. So to your point about in North America, we don't have that much help as you would do in India, Singapore, Dubai. I mean, and I also kind of want to be there. Like we do have a whole village of support, but they're just having these different nuances, like 5 and 2. And I'm still always the one bringing people together. I mean, I'm a community organizer.
Yeah.
I love bringing people together in this just communal feeling, but also it's taxing to be that mama bear for your friend circle, and you're not being met. And then,
and no one asks you how you are.
Right.
Because they're like,
but they're just expecting.
Neeta is so strong.
Right.
She's a guru.
Exactly.
So no one asks her.
No one asks you.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, why aren't you paying attention to me? Why aren't you,
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a minute.
Checking in on me all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, what about, hi.
Do you know only 1 in 3 people ask questions of other people?
1 in 3?
That's in, I just watched a lecture by David Brooks. Again, person without children, watching stuff on the internet all the time.
This is why you're spilling the tea. 1 in 3 people
Yes.
only ask questions about other people.
So one of my Indian besties in Singapore, he's getting back into dating after 8 years, and he's close to 60. And somewhere along the line, so he stopped dating 8 years ago. He just went Asian uncle on me, where it was just like monologuing stories. I really saw a shift during COVID. So his connection type became very much like that Asian uncle. You have the family thing that's always talking about the glory days, always very monologue-y. And it was so beautiful. He was so vulnerable with me. He took me out for beautiful dinner for my 40th and said, Simone, I realized after COVID, one person is not enough. And I would really like to meet someone, but I'm super rusty and I'm on this Bumble app and what do I do? And I said, honey, you just ask the lady questions. Just don't talk about yourself. If only 1 in 3 men are asking questions, you be the 1 in 3. It's so easy.
It's so easy.
Just let that lady with the divorce feel heard. Do it. Do it. And he looked at me like I had said the sky is full of pink elephants. But that you realize that is such a sign of the individualistic, narcissistic culture that we're actually playing in.
Yeah.
Even though I live in Asia and even though, we are more collectivist, the influence of how we're consuming media now has completely made us all.
It's so true. It's like we're dumb about,
everybody wants a podcast. Not at all any offense. Like every person has a podcast. Like in their toilet.
In their toilet.
With their monologuing thoughts.
Yeah, it's the monologue.
It's the monologue. And
it's like we forgot to be brave in relationships. We forgot to just ask, hey, how are you doing? And I noticed that this weekend. I'm like, is it because I'm an interviewer that I'm just so curious to ask questions about people? But I don't feel the same way.
Is it because you're public and they think that your life is amazing?
Maybe. But some of these, one friendship in particular, and that was really, that was a really earth shocking. It was very sad, our friendship breakup. And I feel like nobody ever talks to you, or we don't really talk about friendship breakups. And if it was a toxic thing, or if it was one-sided, or if another person came into their life, or situations change, they go through, they become a mom or whatever, there's a loss there.
Oh, the mourning is huge. I went through this in 2019.
The mourning is huge.
The vacuum, how hard it was to do, it was worse than any breakup with a guy that I've ever been through.
Yeah.
It was horrible.
Because you think and you build all these memories with this person, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay.
But I will say it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because everything that happened since is like my wildest dreams. And the women that have come, I basically found out that a girl that I thought was my bestie was talking bad things about me. And that was,
I'm so sorry.
That's not the standard that but I think that's also this whole exact same conversation about the growth thing that we were saying. I was growing, and people do like you sometimes to remain
the same.
The crazy single girl with the self-sabotaging behaviors can make other people feel better.
Yeah, of
and
course.
That's who I was at the end of my media career, because I was so unengaged with the work that I was doing in media, and so because I'm so full of energy, like you are.
Of course,
like that
we're
energy.
like lightning bolts.
Bottled. In Asia they call it chili padi, which is the tiny chilies, small in size, that are very, very potent and very spicy. So
chili padi.
It's English chili padi, and so you know, that energy of mine was going to toxic behaviors like promiscuity and getting drunk and things that were so beneath the highest version of myself. But it made that particular individual feel really good about her marriage and whatever she was doing. And so when I wanted to change that and commit myself fully to a transformation, it didn't go down well from the things that were repeated back to me. And I knew intuitively in like one of those whole body moments that I was like, oh, you've got to do it. It was so scary.
Gotta let it go.
And I remember the first couple of social things where we were both at the same place post this. And one was a wedding, and I actually requested to make sure I'd be seated at a different, that I wouldn't collide.
Oh, wow.
And then since then, COVID happened and that stretch of time healed and moved far beyond. I don't harbor any ill will now. Yeah. But if I look at the quality of the friendship that I have now, none of the girls in my life now would ever speak badly of me, nor would I. And you're like, well, that's a sacrifice you have to make in order to get this beautiful, authentic, sisterly friendship that I always wanted.
It's so true. It's so true. It's like after that relationship or friendship ended, it was like, oh wow, now the people that are coming into my life,
vacuum.
It was like,
bring it, baby.
I know it. Well, that was when we connected too, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is like you're grieving the loss of this thing, which was amazing while it was, but you know, we have different growth edges, and we're just growing completely separately, and it's like, oh my gosh, the meaningful connections and the depth that we have, and the fact that I can be an ice queen and you're like, yes, I support you being the ice queen and being unapologetic, do more of that. Where in a previous capacity, I'd be shunned for, oh, why are you putting up your boundaries? Yeah. And so I've never experienced that out of you. I don't like this version of you. And so it's interesting to see when you allow yourself to be who you are in this stage, this arena, you start to attract people who will unapologetically be cheering you on, championing you on, and supporting you.
People who are happy for other people. I think there's one thing that that
genuinely happy,
that actually playing more closely to the highest version of me rather than self-sabotaging Simone. One of the things that was really revealed to me, because I'd never really done that before, I'd always kept myself nice and small, was I realized how few people are actually happy for other people. And
like genuinely.
Yeah. And since I'm really genuinely happy for other people, because I just feel the world is so, look how many markets there are, look how many places there are. I mean, there's enough for everyone. And then I started to attract women who are exactly the same. So my girls now are never like, it's not even a thought. In fact, we're so awake as we get older. We're like, oh, it all matters, but it doesn't matter.
Yes.
That's our phrase. Like, it matters to feed me, but actually, I will not remember this on my deathbed. This, whose podcast got most numbers, who got most followers on Instagram. Like, no, they're that level of consciousness.
Oh, wow.
And therefore, when you're that level of consciousness, of course, you're happy for everyone, because you realize that we are here for connection. And so wasting your time not being happy for someone else is just a spear in your own heart.
And you're doing yourself a disservice too. And, as we kind of round out this conversation, anything else around healing after friendship breakups or finding true meaningful connection that you want to share?
Yeah, so step one in the healing of the friendship breakup, I just don't want people firstly to diminish what a big loss that is and to grieve it the same way you'd grieve a breakup. Or
Oh, that's so good.
Oh my God. Just coming from an Asian family and having such profound loss in the family and being told by all these aunties like, oh, just don't talk about it anymore. He's dead already. Why you want to talk about your father died already? Don't talk about it. Like things that we laugh at, Neeta. But in the 2000s or the 90s, this was... You were taught to revere these aunties and believe them.
Right.
And now with all we know about mental health post-pandemic and me talking to them, being in cahoots with all the researchers in social connection, you're like, how could they be conditioning the young people in the family system to? So I would just like to project that onto your adult friendship breakups. Please treat them like it's a loss. Like
it's a loss. It's a breakup.
And you need to go through those grief stages the same way with that. And However, if you felt relief after severing that relief is your Jenga game. That relief
So true.
is the living in alignment. And I can't believe, and my best girlfriends, after this thing happened, my sister said, we love you, but this was 5 years too late. Like, this was 5 years and probably a lot of screaming at you too late. And so they had kind of been...
They kind of knew that this was the thing.
I think they wanted this for me to draw this line.
Yeah.
But they are so respectful, and that, you know, they would never say something, because it's such a big thing to tell someone to cut their sibling off, right?
Right. Oh, it's
so
huge.
they were just so respectful about it. And I know it's not forever, because we are both very good daughters managing my mother's condition. So I will see her again, and we will. It's just a break for now. But if you feel that relief after you do it, that is your body somatically telling you
It was the right
thing. Did you feel relief?
I did, but it was so abrupt, and there was kind of a third party involved as well. And it was hard because all of us were kind of in the same friendship group, including my husband. And so I think that was hard, because now it's not just me and a person. It's like the group.
Yeah.
And so that, and I think people were like, oh, what does this mean for like the group? How are we going to? And I think for me, I needed to take space, but I think there was a big grieving loss period. For sure. Now I'm like, oh my gosh, like, why didn't I see it?
Why did I do this
Why
earlier?
didn't I see this clearly? But I think that's the thing. That's the beauty of it, right? You know, sometimes we want to hold on to things so long, but then later on you're like, oh, wait a minute. If I hadn't cut those ties, I wouldn't have had the deep and meaningful friendships that I'm meant to have in this stage. You know,
yes,
post 40 era, of course.
Yes.
So I think that's the big beauty and lesson. And I think for anybody who is navigating a breakup, a friendship breakup, or figuring out those deep, true connections that are real, I mean, this is definitely an episode to re-listen to and to even share with your friends. And I feel like don't be afraid to talk about it with other people, like you were sharing. And
I would just caveat this conversation as well, that the lonely brain can sometimes take our perception off a little bit as to, am I cutting someone off because I'm lonely and there's an irrational spiral, or is this something I have mulled on a long time? And so I would just throw you to checking out the book just to learn. So good. Before we go to just making these very big cutting off decisions. Just making sure you're going through that loneliness checklist in the book, making sure you're not doing this from the lonely brain, holding people to a higher standard than is necessary.
Oh my gosh.
This is just a mental health
check.
Disclaimer. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so true. So Secret Pandemic.
This is the Southeast Asian version.
Okay, so for those we rank really high in Singapore as well. So anybody who is in Southeast Asia, you can get Secret Pandemic, The Search for Connection in a Lonely World. Now, for those of you who are everywhere else, get Let's Talk About Loneliness by Simone Heng.
Thank you.
Okay. And where can we follow all of your adventures and shenanigans?
Shenanigans and adventures. LinkedIn, Simone-Heng-Speaker, and then Instagram, Simone Heng.
Okay. Oh my gosh.
I love you.
You're the best.
You're the best.
Oh
I can't believe I'm sitting.
Let's do this again.
I'm like sweating because I'm so excited to be with Neeta. Oh my God.
Until next time on the Brave Table. Oh my goodness. Welcome back to the other side. Now, we were just with Simone Heng, and if you have not gotten her book, Let's Talk About Loneliness, you can go ahead, grab it in the link in the show notes, share it with a friend, get it for somebody in your friends group, in your community. Let this be part of your book club. We can't talk about loneliness enough, and we are linking her other episode because we've loved her so much. We had to bring her back for part 2. But in the first episode, we actually talk about the steps on what real connections are, how to know if you are lonely in relationship, and so much more. So be sure to listen to that episode. And we will also link a few other episodes in the show notes as well, if you are curious about your own mental health journey, so that you can also make those changes and really stay connected with what makes you come alive and what brings you the most joy. And also, you can follow Simone Heng on IG. We link that in the show notes as well as on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, follow us, tag us, let us know what you thought of the episode on the Brave Table at Neeta Bhushan. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you haven't subscribed, welcome. This is your oasis, your destination. Go ahead and subscribe, like the video. Let us know what was really present for you in this conversation. And don't forget to be just a little bit more brave. I will see you next time.